to Shakespeare Project and NPR's The Spiderweb. And his book of poems, Questionable Shapes, was published by the Cervena Barva Press. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Doug. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And I got some questions for you, as I usually do.
All right.
Now, you were one of the first editors. We're talking about. I interviewed DeWitt Henry, who was the founder, one of the founders, or was he the founder? One of the founders.
He and Peter O'Malley.
Peter O'Malley. And you were one of the early editors of Ploughshares. Could you tell us what it was like in those heady days of yore?
Well, there were some other little magazines going around at the time, and they published.
Do you know, DeWitt gave me the first edition, the guy with the bass player.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, it's terrific.
It is.
So we brought together some interesting talent. Some of the covers were done by a wonderful local artist named Omar White, who used to work for the Boston Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
He was a cartoonist for the Phoenix.
Mr. Minich died recently. Yeah,
that's right. Steve Minich, a great man.
Yeah. And
a great sort of patron of the arts in Boston.
Okay.
Anyhow, DeWitt Henry, who was finishing his PhD at Harvard and was teaching at Emerson later on. Actually, the first year he was teaching with me over at Simmons. We found some sections of the freshman writing for him to teach, but he had a love of literature, an intense love of literature and of modern writing that I think the rest of us didn't necessarily have. He wanted this to be a high-quality literary magazine. Peter O'Malley, one of the two O'Malley brothers.
Did he have a PhD in music or something of that music?
Peter O'Malley?
Yeah.
I don't think a PhD in music, but he was a serious composer.
Yeah.
So, and he wrote film scores, and he was a kind of, in many ways, he's a dear friend, but a kind of stage Irishman. Kept his Dublin accent.
Like Shea Duffin.
What?
Like Shea Duffin. I interviewed him once.
That's right. So he hard drinking, storytelling, backslapping, a generous, wonderful person. And somehow Peter was always able to come up with some of the money necessary to keep Ploughshares going. I think I told you just before we went on a little story. I don't think Peter would mind that the reason the magazine is called Ploughshares is that he and his brother Pork were in a group of people who owned the Plough and the Star, the very famous literary pub.
It's still in Central Square, and it's sort of a revised form.
Corner of Central and Hancock.
Yeah.
I mean, Mass Ave and Hancock Street.
Right.
And so everyone...
Do you still drink there occasionally?
No, not really.
No.
So when a printer's bill had to be paid, Peter would sometimes go into the Plough when no one was looking. He would lift up open the cash register and take out $30 or $40, which is whatever how much the printer was demanding at that moment, and that was his share of the proceeds of the Plough, as it's generally called, to pay the printer's bill to keep Ploughshares going. So the word Ploughshares doesn't come from the famous Irish Republican Army flag, which is a plough and the stars. It's the title of a play by Sean O'Casey.
Good one.
But in fact, it's Peter's share of the Plough.
Well, it was interesting. Henry pointed out that there's a tradition of, especially in Ireland, of magazines that are sort of started in pubs.
Yes, yes, I think so.
Yeah. Do you know of any magazine? Not offhand.
In America, I think they usually come out of universities and university towns.
Yeah.
Or cultural towns like Boston.
Yeah.
Or places where there are a lot of wide variety of bars, like New York City.
Right.
Where the rents are cheap. And the talent is electric, and you get people ready to start out.
Well, like Whitman, when he was young, he went to the same bar and he knew all these
same bar and the same restaurant, right on the corner of Broadway and Bleecker. I forget the name of it. It was a bar and a restaurant, but they used to have these literary salons. But these are mostly unmarried young men in that period. Whereas a lot of us, we were married, we had kids, we had jobs. We were never going to make any money out of Ploughshares, but we did want to attract the best talent. Peter was married to Richard Wilbur's beautiful, wonderful daughter, Ellen, who was also a great friend of the Poets Theater. And Dick Wilbur, Richard Wilbur, another one of our great heroes that we lost the last couple of years, gave us a poem or two in the early years so that we had some cachet. And he, of course, knew all the great poets in the United States. We're now talking about the 1970s here. Ploughshares just a couple of years ago celebrated its 40th anniversary. It's going on 50 years.
And that, that is quite an accomplishment. Most small
It
press
is. It
magazines
is an
don't last that
accomplishment.
long. We just started 20 years, and they say that's great, but can you imagine?
It is great, yes.
Or Hanging Loose, for instance, has been since 60.
I attribute it to the hard work and dedication of DeWitt Henry.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody I've never seen anyone give so much of himself to a single project over the decades. This is like decades now. And at a moment, this is sometime maybe in the 80s, Peter and DeWitt said, we need a home. They were working out of DeWitt's apartment down in Cambridgeport, or then there was a storefront up off Waverly Ave in Watertown, and we're trying to get someplace to keep the books and to keep the letters and to have an office. So he had been doing some teaching for Simmons, as I said. So he came to me and said, I would like Ploughshares to be located at Simmons. So it could be Ploughshares at Simmons College. What do you think? I said, that's a great idea. So I went to my department. I went to the president. I said, this could be an opportunity for Simmons to be the host and the home of one of America's truly great literary magazines, which maybe no one realized at the time how important it was. And there was no enthusiasm at Simmons. One of the greatest mistakes I think that Simmons ever made not to do that. So they went to Emerson. Emerson said, well, this could be part of our creative writing program. We have a BA and an MA in creative writing. Let's do it. And so now when you pick up a copy of Ploughshares, it says Ploughshares at Emerson College. It's good for Emerson. It's good for Ploughshares. It was a marriage made in heaven. And I kick myself for not having pushed harder to make it happen at Simmons, but you can lead a horse to water.
Right. So now I was going to ask you, you've been a part of the Poets Theater. I mean, it's around since 1950, and now you work out of, I know you've done some stuff at the Sanders Theaters also,
yes,
and the Athenaeum. Tell me, tell me a bit about the theater, and tell me you are the literary manager.
I'm the literary director.
I'm
the guy who solicits and in some cases writes and pulls together scripts that our group of actors and directors do. Not a lot of us are active poets, although among the poets who work with the Poets Theater are Fred Marchand and Lloyd Schwartz, and myself, a few others. But for the most part, they're theater people, like Robert Scanlon. Bob Scanlon is our artistic director. Ben Evett, one of the great local actors, one of the best actors in the area, who was the founder of the Actors Shakespeare Project, has been with us for the last 4 or 5 years. Let me explain something about the Poets Theater. It was founded in about 1950 by people like John Ashbery and Richard Wilbur and Alison Lurie, the novelist, and Richard Eberhard. And these were people living in Boston at the time, young poets, just feeling their oats, just feeling excited about being writers and having a community of writers. And some of them finally said, let's put on some plays, including Frank O'Hara. It's one of our unsung heroes. Frank O'Hara is a man made for the theater in many ways, flamboyant, self-dramatizing. And so this all happened in the 1950s. The first reading of Dylan Thomas's Under Milk Wood was a Poets Theater production. So
did Frank O'Hara act at all?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. How was he as an actor? He was good.
I had no idea. I wasn't around.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. But
I was in grade school at the time.
Okay. I know that.
So, there's a generational gap there.
Yeah.
I did go to what I call the boys department at Radcliffe.
Yeah.
I did a lot of acting at Harvard.
Yeah.
And in my senior year, which was 1962, it's a long time ago.
It is.
I was in a Poets Theater production. The great Village Voice cartoonist, Jules Pfeiffer.
Oh, yeah, I know.
We dramatized some of
He
his
was a
cartoons.
playwright, too.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
More recently, yes.
Yeah.
We dramatized some of his cartoons. And I got to play part of someone, the typical Jules Pfeiffer characters are a kind of sad sack New York woman with artistic pretensions.
Yeah, they're always in black leotards.
Here's my dance to spring, like this.
Black leotards.
And she has a taste in, all the men in her life are brutes and thugs. And so I get to walk on the stage at Sanders Theater in my motorcycle boots. And back in those days, I still had all my hair. I was quite a hunk. And I get to straight around. So I was in a Poets Theater.
Nothing wrong with not having hair.
Nothing wrong with that. I was in a Poets Theatre production in the Poets Theatre's first life. They put on plays until about 1968 in a wooden loft behind the Harvard Coop. You know, there's an alley that separates the two parts of the Coop. The left-hand side of that alley used to be an old frame building. The Cambridge Fire Department regularly said, "There's going to be a fire here. You can't put on plays." And they said, "Oh, sorry to hear that. Goodbye." Mm-hmm. They went up it had been finally burned down in '68. And that was the end of the Poets Theatre, everyone thought. And then,
So it was across from Club Passeum, huh?
yes, exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And so then, 20 years later, about 1988, 89, one of the great leaders of the Poets Theatre, a woman named Molly Howe, Mary Manning Howe. She was Sam Beckett's best friend when they were children, and their mothers were best friends. And she had acted with Yeats in the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. And she was the real live wire along the Poets Theatre in those years. She said, "Let's have a wake. Let's remember the Poets Theatre. It'll become alive in our memories." And we had, out at the JFK Library, we had a gigantic party to remember the Poets Theatre.
Yeah.
Seamus Heaney read beautifully.
Right.
And after, toward the end of this big party with a lot of literary lights and poets, we said, why, instead of grieving the passing of the Poets Theatre, why don't we bring it back to life? So we did. All through the 1990s and into the first couple of years of the 21st century.
Are you familiar? There's like another Poets Theatre, Richard Cambridge's Poets Theatre. Are you familiar with his? He used to run in the Club Passeum for a while.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
This is the one involved people like William Alfred.
Yeah.
And
yeah, he was a playwright. Yeah. He did Hogan's Goat, wasn't it?
that's William Alfred. That was a that was a Poets Theatre production.
Oh, okay.
Which
Alfred are you talking about?
William Alfred wrote Hogan's Goat.
That's what I meant. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a Poets Theatre production, one of the best. It's a
And then
wonderful
what was
play.
the star who started?
Well, it was Faye Dunaway.
Faye Dunaway.
She was in the graduate program in drama at BU.
Oh, yeah.
And she and Bill Alford, who was a kind of saint, a kind of monk.
Yeah, I always saw him in a black suit and a derby or something like that.
He was a darling man. He was Irish American to the core, from New York. And of course, Hogan's Goat is a poetic play. It's a play written in verse, but it's very realistic and very powerful. And he taught me. He was my teacher of Anglo-Saxon when I was an undergraduate. He was an amazing man, much beloved.
Yeah.
And so Bill Alford died, and Molly Manning Howe died, and the Poets Theatre kind of crumpled the second time in the early, like 2002, 2003. Then about 4 years ago, we're not talking about 2014, Ben Evett, who I founded the Actors Shakespeare Project, Bob Scanlon, who had worked with the Poets Theatre, and I got together and said, let's bring it back a third time. And that's what we've done for the past 4 years.
That's great.
We don't ask poets to write plays. We look for scripts that have linguistic power to them, language that sticks in your ear. Forget about sets, forget about fancy costumes. Our actors are good actors who play not to your eye, but to your ear and to your mind.
And in fact, you talked about your group having a sort of, like commercial theater and things like that. You say it's lacking in that,
This is, I have to say, it's a great moment for Boston theater. There are more theater companies, more good acting, good playwriting in Boston than in any time since I was 18 when I first came here up from North Carolina to become a Bostonian. It's an amazing moment. But to have a theater company and pay the bills, you've got to work with you have to have good community connections. Look at the Central Square Theater. It's 2 or 3. There's an Underground Railroad. It's got a couple of other theater companies that work together. They help each other bring in audiences. They're quite successful. No one gets rich over there, but the actors get paid, the playwrights get exposure, and that's a good model. We're a kind of specialty theater. We're not weighed down by our history, but we really believe in what you might call actors' theater, in which we educate an audience to sit still and listen to the language that's coming out of our mouths into your ears. It's a minuscule, minimalist approach to theater, but our people love us. Our audiences love us.
Okay. Now, I was going to go on because I've got to watch the time, but I was reading. You did this, Seamus Heaney's translation of Beowulf, and
right.
reading I was reading some commentary on it and talking about that specific translation, and he said he just had brought a great power to Beowulf, and for instance he said he started when the king, what was his name again? The king of Danes.
The king of Danes is Hrothgar.
Hrothgar.
No, Hrothgar. Hrothgar.
Okay, I won't make it on the Poets Theatre, but
he's the old king.
Yeah, he's the old king. Now he's sort of.
I played both Hrothgar.
But it starts out with the traditional translations were hear me, but I guess Heaney had so, and sort of put you in a hypnotic sort of trigger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the way we did it and the way I wrote this, which was done over at the Cambridge Multicultural Arts Center, not far from here. Mm-hmm. The audience settles in around little tables, not in rows, and they're going to be offered sort of paleo food, some root vegetables, and some odds and ends. And I stood out on the stage and spoke the first 10 lines of the poem in Anglo-Saxon. What we gardena in Yerdagum, Theodkinninga, Thrimja Frunen, who's a Athelingas, Ellen Fremedan. I rattled on like this, the audience says, what is this? And then, without a pause, I just went right into Seamus's translation. And we had actors, and we had parts, and we set the scene. It's a long, complicated poem. Seamus translated all of it that we have. And I had to cut it mercilessly to get it down to about an hour and a half on stage. But as I was saying to you before, this is old-fashioned home movies. Epic poetry is...
But it's been adopted in popular culture.
Sure it is. Oh, yes. Yeah. And we even brought in, there's some Viking swordsmen that we brought in to do a Viking sword fight in the middle of our show. They perform as sort of King Richard's fairs sort of things.
That's great. And I was going to ask you, because I want you to have some time to read from your work, your new book by our friend Cervena Barva Press, Gloria Mindock's press, Questionable Shapes. And in fact, it was one that actually was the first poem. Well, there's several poems I like. You wrote this one called Disaffiliation. Disaffiliation, about the cycle of poets' lives, which I thought was very interesting. But also, your first poem, which was titled, I'm sorry.
Disaffiliation.
That was Disaffiliation.
I mean, the word affiliation.
No. The disaffiliation was about your mother, right?
My mother, yes.
And the poem seems to have some echoes in Beowulf, where the guy comes out of the sea, and then the king we were discussing, and then he goes back out on a boat to his death. So we come out of the sea, we come, go, make our mark, and go out.
Well, actually, it's more Homeric in my case.
Okay.
There is a scene, and I draw heavily on Homer on this.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the Odyssey in which Homer puts Odysseus, or Ulysses, lets him enter the underworld, the land of the dead. And his mother is there. And he tries to embrace her, and he can't because she's just a spirit. She's a ghost, which is, if you want, I'll read it to you.
Let's go ahead.
Okay, this is and the word affiliation, of course, means to be a son. Filia means a son or a daughter.
Okay.
And affiliation means you are a daughter or a son with some organization. To disaffiliate means you lose the state of being a son. Even before she is dead, your mother comes toward you from the shadow of the seawall, her eyes blank as a sleepwalker's. Even now, as her other self is somewhere filling a glass of water or breaking an egg, you stretch out your arms and wait for her to know you, and you close your embrace, but she passes through like smoke through a screen door. At this very moment, as you hold the black cradle to your ear and hear her voice 1,000 miles away at your side, going on about weather and when to fly, even at such a time, you pace the rim of the wall, gazing out over the flat sea for a boat that will not come home.
Beautiful. Yeah. I have a 92-year-old mother.